Hey, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Mighty Mini Sportster. Now, if you haven't seen the FT Mighty Mini Sportster or its bigger brother, they're both in an episode where we pylon raced them, and it's linked below. Now, as always, there's free build plans, free build video, which you're watching now, and you can always support us through our store by buying the speed build kit. The Mighty Mini Sportster runs off of two different size packs. The A pack, which is an 1806 2300 kV motor, and also a new F pack, which has a little bit more power. It's kind of like the equivalent to our C packs on some of the models, but if you want a nice slow experience, you can go with the A pack. If you really want this thing to go crazy, go ahead and go with the F. Alright, let's get our materials and get started. Now would be an excellent time to also center up your servos and cut your control horns in length. If you're using our 9051 servos, we use actually the smallest T-style servo arm, and we cut it down, revealing the longest portion of the arm on it. Go ahead and do that, get your materials ready, and we'll get started. We're going to go ahead and start with the wing. Now, as you can see on the building board, that the wing does not come as a kit pre-painted, but we painted it ahead of time, and we're going to actually have a link down below to show you a quick tip on how to do this. It's very simple. The nice thing about doing complicated curves while it's still flat, it's much easier to stencil off and to paint. But we went ahead and pre-painted the whole plane. That way you don't have to deal with masking off a small airframe. The first step is with our score cuts facing down. We're going to join the two wing halves. We're going to split the tape right about in the middle. I'm going to line up these edges very carefully. Make sure you line up the trail edge and the leading edge as perfect as you can. There we are. And I'm pushing them together with a little bit of pressure. There we are. Now, on this side, I'm going to open up the middle gap halfway. And I'm only going to be putting glue from where the leading edge is going to be to the trailing edge. I'm starting about 1/4 of an inch in and ending about 1/4 inch from the edge. You're going to have a little bit squeeze out when you fold this together. You can take a scrap piece from your foam or from your scrap foam and smear off the excess. I like to take the extra little piece of tape and fold it over on the back end. Let's go ahead and repeat that same process on the front here. Now you notice that we haven't put any glue from the leading edge to the trailing edge on the top skin. That's because later on we're going to go back and we're going to establish dihedral, and then we're going to glue it down. Once the glue is thoroughly dried, we're going to go ahead and fold this in half. And while I have this open, let's go over some score cuts. On the plans that Dan Sponholz made and did a fantastic job, you're going to notice that red is score cut, black is cut through, and blue is etch. You're going to want to follow that. So these lines here are all our score cuts. This main line from here to here, right ending off on the rectangle, is going to be what's going to establish as our leading edge. That line there, we're going to want to cut a double bevel in. Now for the double bevel, we're going to fold it 180 degrees. And I'm going to take this to the edge of the table here. Actually, let's just do it in favor of the camera. Now with our razor blade extended, this is a razor blade we sell in our starter kit. I'd strongly recommend get the sharpest razor you can and make sure it stays sharp. If it gets dull, just replace it. We're going to establish with a nice long angle and keeping this right about the leading edge, and we're going to pull. If you go too perpendicular, your cut will be wavy. Now we're going to repeat that process on the other side. Now, if you're uncomfortable about using a razor blade, you can always go back with about 120 grit sandpaper on a sanding block and sand this bevel in. What you want to see is when this folds up that you can pass it over a 90-degree angle easily. If it doesn't pass easily, go back and shave off a little bit more. And if you cut through the paper on the other side, don't worry, you can easily repair that with a piece of tape. Now that we got our double bevel cut, we're going to lay the top skin face up, and we're going to fold the lower skin over. And we're going to take this very gently. We're not going to try to force it. We're just going to let the paper slowly relax around the leading edge. We're doing this because it's a very, very thin airfoil, and we don't want to overstress the airframe or the paper by trying to do it in one step. So now when we fold this over, you can see that it has a nice subtle curve. Our next step is to glue our 2 spar pieces in. Whenever we put glue down, I like to slide it back and forth a little bit and spread that out. The thinner you can make your glue, the stronger the bond's going to be. And the way we're lining this up is we're lining it between these 2 score cut lines, here and here. And we're leaving it pretty much flush. You project a line down here. As long as you make sure you start from the center line of the wing, it'll line up perfectly. We're going to repeat this same process on the other side. There we are. All right, let's go back and do another test fit. Feels real nice. Now if you see any areas here where it's not nice and curved and it's kind of crooked, go back and give it a little bit of encouragement with your thumbs and establish the blend on your score cuts. Once you're happy with that, we're going to go ahead and place a bead of glue on the leading edge, the spar, and then also the trailing edge right here. Let's go ahead and start with the spar. Always make sure you have an extra glue stick handy at all times. That way if you run out, you can quickly replace one. Generally with big wings, we take our time and we only do 1 step at the time and save the trail edge for the end. But in this case, the wing is so small, it's going to be a very tight fit in the back. It's better to do it all at once. You're going to want to hold down any piece that has under pressure for at least 30 seconds. Hum a song in your head if you want, but make sure when you start releasing pressure, if you start seeing it spring back, you haven't waited long enough. And it never hurts to inspect the joints to make sure they're nice and tight. If any of it's springy, you can always put a little bit of glue there and then go back and hold it. This looks really good. While that's on the bottom, let's go ahead and just pop out these little reliefs here. There we are. Next step is to take your razor blade, and this area here that we didn't cut, or that we didn't glue, we're going to start about a 1/2 inch from the trailing edge. Trailing edge is the back of the wing, and we're going to work up towards the front. Just enough to open it up a little bit, like that. Now in your kit or on the plans, you have a dihedral gauge. The dihedral gauge looks like a funny rectangle with a notch cut out of it. We're going to go ahead and take that now and use that as our prop. Now in your kit, you have a funny looking rectangle with a notch in it. This is your dihedral gauge. The dihedral gauge is going to go at the very tip of the wing, on the very furthest point. And that's going to establish your dihedral. Now with the center section opened up a little bit, we're going to bury the tip of our hot glue gun. And we're going to put a pretty healthy amount of glue right down into the center section. And we're going to take our dihedral gauge and we're going to hold the wing in place until it's thoroughly dry. I'm going to go ahead and just take a scrap piece of foam and squeegee this tape. Squeegee the hot glue right down into the tape. If you have a heavy book or a catalog, you can always weight it down. So you can see when the wing is built, it's going to be very difficult to paint around edges and mask it off compared to doing it ahead of time. At this point, your wing is done. We're not going to go ahead and cut out the ailerons until it's installed into the fuselage. So we can put this aside and get the pieces out for our fuselage. Our next step is to build the fuselage. For our fuselage, we're going to need 5 pieces punched out. Now before we start, we're going to want to remove some foam here and establish a B-fold. One thing I like to do, especially on small airframes, is just lightly score where the score lines are and just get as close to the foam as possible. You don't want to cut all the way through, but you want to just really establish where the cuts are supposed to be. This makes folding and removing the foam very easy. Now to remove it, we're just going to take our nail and slightly rock this out, just like this. If you score deep enough, the foam will come out in a complete clean chunk. Now for the fuselage, we're going to want to remove some foam cavities. Those cavities are going to be here, 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 and here. And you can also punch out the knockouts here, and for that matter right here. Now it's handy if you have a steel ruler. We're going to establish a crease line along these etch lines here. Now on your plan it's going to be marked as a blue line. I'm going to go ahead and lay this down right over the etch line. And all this is doing is telling us right where we want to crease it. I'll lift up carefully. I'm going to bend it up to about a 45 degree and then relax it. Same process on the other side. This is basically telling us where the foam is going to need to be creased, and it'll make your fuselage look even nicer on the other side. Now we're going to go ahead and fold our fuselage sides. With the fuselage, it's very important that we build it as square as possible because everything mounts to it. If you don't have a triangle already, I'd strongly recommend you get one. If you don't have any building supplies, we do sell a crafty kit that has your hot glue gun, hot glue sticks, knives, triangles, everything you need to build the kit and have success. It even comes with servo centers and battery voltage checkers. Now for a B-fold, we're going to have the side plates be beside the bottom plate. And if you look at this diagram right etched straight into the kit, you'll see exactly what I mean. I'm going to flip this with the nose facing towards us, and since I have this little building board here, I can let this go. But you can see that this actually recesses down. If you're working on a workbench, bring that portion just ahead of it so when you fold it, it doesn't flatten out or crush against it. But I can use this little building board edge, so when I fold this up, this isn't getting crushed. We're going to focus most of our glue on the side of the bottom plate. Just like that. With the flat on the building board, we're going to rotate to 90 degrees, and we're going to hold it there. Good. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Always make sure you go back and you check for square after every crease and every fold. Once again, we're pushing, using the table as a friend. We're folding the side plates down, pushing against that table. And then checking for square. Give it a good 30 seconds and it should be dry. Now we're going to put a very, very thin ribbon of glue right on these top portions here. And I'm actually going to do all four at once. Keep it as thin as possible so you don't end up gluing it to your building board. I'm just going to fold one side in, get it about 45 degrees of the way, go to the other side, and then I'm going to press it down nice and firm. As we design more and more kits, we're trying to get more and more finished edges and also make these last a lot longer. We really appreciate your feedback you've been giving us on what you'd like to see. And more longevity to the airframes is one thing. Now you can see I have a nice finished top and it's not going to delaminate on you. We're going to go ahead and remove this paper here because we need to follow the contour. And to make it bend, it can only have one piece of paper on one side. There we are. And you can see now, it bends very, very easily. Go ahead and open this crack up right here like so. Now, with the skinny end going towards the tail, we're going to slide this all the way to the trail edge and lightly kind of let it find its way all the way forward. There we are. The reason I put the score cut in is so we could open up one half, apply the glue, and then press it down and let it dry. Then we can open up the other half and just repeat the same process. So we're going to do that right now. Whenever we're gluing this down, we're going to focus right at the point where the paper meets the foam board. That way the glue will squeeze out evenly on both the paper and the foam. It's a good time to keep a scrap piece of foam handy. We're going to gently let this find itself back home. Now, we're going to multitask a little bit. You have a little bit of time, but rather than burning my fingers, I'm going to go ahead and use my scrap piece of foam, press it down, I'm going to go back and make sure it's squeezed nice and tight. When all that's done, I'm going to go back to checking it for square again. If your tail's crooked, your elevator and your rudder are going to be crooked. Let's go ahead and repeat the process on the front side. Same as before, putting the nozzle right at the point where the foam and the paper meet. Medium, it's about a millimeter or a 1/16 of an inch bead. I'm going to press it down in. Now I'm going to really focus on making sure those sides and bottom are all nice and tight. If you're wondering where this building board came from, this is something we developed for schools and group builds so people don't damage their tables. This is going to be coming out very, very soon when we announce FT Connections, or check it right now. It may already be out. A couple coats of camp dry will keep glue from sticking to it, so just flex right off. In your kit, you're going to see a rectangle piece that looks like this. We're going to go ahead and apply some glue to the back of it. You can see I have a little overspray on this. I'm also going to apply a little bit to the sides here, not a lot. That way it gives a little bit more strength in the fuselage. Now I'm going to set that inside here and we'll press it down. We'll slide it into place. You can see the edges are flush. Now we're going to put our attention towards this top little sheet of paper. This is just to finish off the front edge so it doesn't delaminate and give it a little bit more strength. I'm going to put a little bit of glue here, using the same piece of scrap foam. I'm going to press this down, rub it back and forth, get it nice and flat, and do the same right here. Hot glue's heat transfers much better through the paper than it does through the foam, so be careful not to burn yourself. Our next step is to install the doublers. Now I pre-painted the doublers just so we don't have to do as much work to finish off the paint job when the airframe's complete. So I'm going to apply some glue here. I'm going to drop this down and I'm just kind of smear it around here just so that glue works up towards the front. I'll press down. I'm putting all my focus on this seam right here, making sure that it's nice and tight against the fuselage. If you allow this to bubble up, it's going to make your power pod tight. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side and install this doubler. Try to do it so you can see it easier. What I'm focusing on is to make sure that this edge right here and here is nice and flush. Now if you want some added durability, we're going to go ahead and lay a bead of glue on the front leading edge here and here, and that's going to let the two pieces stick together. So far we haven't gone through our first complete glue stick. I'm just going to take my scrap piece of foam, I'm going to work it down on both sides. Kind of like a paintbrush. Where the glue's thin, I just smear a little bit in. Where it's thick, I take a little bit off. Nice thing about hot glue is it holds paint very nicely. We'll repeat the same process on the other side. At this point, we're ready to put our attention to assembling and installing the tail. Alright, we have our rudder and our elevator punched out. We're going to go ahead and cut bevels on it. Now you can see here that there's not much meat here. We're going to want to cut the bevel on the stabilizer side, not the elevator side. Easy way to open this up, put it flat on a table, carefully bend towards you. And then we're going to follow up the same way that we did our leading edge, and we're going to cut a bevel on the stabilizer side. If you guys are wondering what stabilizer means, stabilizer is what gives it pitch stability. It's kind of like the keel on a boat, just turned horizontal to keep the plane from pitching up and down. Alright, now if you can't simply bend this without it fighting you, you can move a little bit more material here until you're happy with that. If it binds here, you're not going to have any down. Go ahead and do the same on the fin. Crack the fin open. Now on this, we're going to cut the bevel on the rudder side, not the fin. Always keep in mind, if you're going to be cutting while you're holding something, watch where your fingers are. Also watch where your thumb is. If you ever notice that the knife is pulling the paper and it's tearing more than it's cutting, that means your knife is dull and you just need to replace your blade. Alright, we have nice movement here and here. Now I'm going to get a clean edge to my scrap piece, because I'm going to use this to squeegee glue down into my hinge line to make it even more durable. Now to do this, you do not need a lot of glue, and I'm going to put the nozzle directly over the paper and then slowly put a thin ribbon of glue right along it. Now I'm going to follow back with the clean edge of a scrap piece of foam. I'm going to work that in, scrape off as much as possible. Alright. Now don't close this while the glue is drying, just set it aside and let it dry. Same process on the rudder. Real thin bead of glue. Squeegee off as much as possible. This is going to keep paper from delaminating and make your plane last a lot longer. Alright, the motion looks good. It's not restricted on both the elevator and the rudder. So now I'm going to go ahead and do a dry fit. Check for fit. Looks good. Alright, while this is in place, I'm going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to put a very thin bead on both sides. Once again with the scrap. I'm going to follow up while the glue is drying with my triangle and make sure everything stays nice and square. At this point, we're going to install the tail assembly onto the fuselage. And before we go ahead and dry fit it, go ahead and pinch this area here and kind of put a little bit of a taper on it so it assembles easier. At this point, we're going to take the rudder portion of the tail, we're going to pass it down through the fuselage, we're going to slide this back until the notches meet. Then we can dry fit it down into place. It's a little bit difficult, but let's go ahead and check and make sure that it's still as square as possible. Looks good. And it doesn't hurt to give it a little eyeball down the center. Once we're happy with that fit, I'm going to take my hot glue gun, put a nice little bead of glue on both portions. Follow up with a scrap piece of foam board, squeegee it off. And as always, whenever you go ahead and you work with hot glue, make sure everything seats back in, and always check for fit and squareness before letting it dry. Our next step is to install our former. It's going to be the biggest former in your kit or on your plans, and that'll press down right into this notch here. Try not to get any glue in this front area. You'll see why later. Check it for square. Let it dry. So with our fuselage complete, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards the top hatch. Now the top hatch, we're going to want to remove the foam here, knock out this little guy here, and also have our little back headrest and our former ready. Now for our headrest area here, we're going to want to do a B-fold. And once again, B-fold is where the side plate is besides the bottom plate. And for that, we're going to use the table as our friend, and we're going to rotate it up, push it down against the table, and let the glue dry. That means we're going to put our glue predominantly on the side of the bottom plate. After you build quite a few of these kits, this will become second nature for you. Just take your time, study the diagrams on the kits, and practice the movement and make sure it makes sense before you glue it into place. Once that's dry, we can glue our little cockpit in. Now before we put the top skin on here, this is a really good opportunity to detail this inside. You could paint it black, you could take a Sharpie marker, you could draw some instruments on, you can do whatever you want. But once you put the poster board paper over it, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do so. Now that the paint is dry, let's go ahead and install the poster board. Now for the poster board, we're going to leave this area here as a hinge, so we don't want to put too much glue on it. What I want to do is put a very, very, very small tack of glue right on the edge here. Not much at all. And I'm going to center this up here. And just hold an angle just like that. And we'll let that thoroughly dry. Take your time to make sure this is as square and centered as possible. Once that's dry, we're going to do a similar process and put a very small portion of glue right on this top, just at the very flat top portion. Now without buckling this in or pulling too tight, we're going to take this to the edge of the table and we're going to let it set just like this. Now we can hold it. The whole goal is to let this stay flat and this stay flat. Don't rush this, give it a good 30 seconds to dry. So we're going to do a couple practice folds here just to make sure everything lines up good. We're going to go ahead and set this down and then we're going to roll this, pushing the foam board against the paper against the building board. Once we're happy and this is nice and parallel and we're happy with the fit, go ahead and put a nice healthy bead. Now keep in mind with kits, there's a little bit of an undercut. So you're going to want to put a little bit more of a generous amount, about a 2 millimeter wide bead or almost 1/8 of an inch. Now we're going to use the building board as our friend. We're going to roll this up and then we're going to press down hard against the table. Now with one hand holding, it's not a bad idea just to grab a little piece of scrap foam board and smear out the extra glue. Another thing I'm going to do is while this is drying, I'm going to kind of fold this in a little bit more than it needs to go. But I'm pushing pretty hard against the table. Reason being is I want to establish a very light crease on the bottom edge that'll kind of grip against the fuselage. Give this a good 30-40 seconds to dry. Once it's dry and it's not springing away from the foam board, we can repeat the exact same process on the other side. A bead right down the bottom, a little bit on here. Roll it and press it hard against the building board and wiping off any excess. You can see I'm holding a little bit more than 90 degrees on purpose. Once this is thoroughly dried, you can see that the paper kind of cups in. That's exactly what we want. Let's also go back and cut these little excess pieces off here. So you can see now the benefit of painting the cockpit ahead of time. Let's go ahead and give it a test fit just to make sure everything looks good. There we are. So when we're just about done with this, our final step is with the hatch is going to be to glue this portion on so it hinges up. We're going to wait until we get our servos in. Our next step is to install servos, control horns, and push rods. Now before we move any further, this is going to be the surface that we're going to go ahead and glue to the foam. We don't want to glue the sticker to the foam, we want to glue the servo. So we're going to peel this off, and we can use sandpaper or a razor blade, but we're going to go ahead and put some scratches in this plastic. This plastic is very fatty, and hot glue won't like to stick to it well. So be careful, but put some nice deep scratches in that plastic. Let's do the same process on the other servo. You'll notice we're scratching the opposite side of where the arm is. So in your kit you have some push rods. We're going to go ahead and slide that through the slot here. Now like we said before, it's very, very important that you center up your servos ahead of time. It's going to be very difficult to go back and adjust this linkage, so if you take the time to do it now, you won't have any regrets. I'm going to keep the push rod so the bend is furthest away from the hinge line of the rudder. Now these are control horns. This is what's going to transfer our push rod movement to our control surface. Slide that on. Then we're going to support the back of the elevator as we push this in for a dry fit. just like that. Now if you sight down this, the hole will line up directly with the hinge line. That's just what we want. Once we're happy with that fit, we're going to remove this, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue right down in the hole. Doesn't have to be a lot. And we're going to press the control horn back in. On the other side, you're going to have a little bit of glue squeeze out. Go ahead and wipe that off. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards the push rod. Give this a good 30-40 seconds to dry, so as you're moving this, it doesn't pull out. Now we don't need linkage stoppers in this step. You can always put it in, but keep in mind if you put linkage stoppers in, it's going to be very difficult to adjust this on a model this size. Also, we want to save as much weight as possible. So to get around that, I'm going to go about a 1/2 inch in from this back bulkhead, maybe about 3/4 of an inch. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to bend this up towards me. Just like that. You can see once I bend this up towards me, I have a nice free motion on my elevator, and that's just what I want. Our next step is to grab the push rod about 1/8 inch from the bend, just about the width of the plywood or the servo arm, and I'm going to bend it away from me. This is what's called a modified Z-bend. Now we don't want all this excess, so we're going to cut it off roughly about 4 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. Now we're going to use the servo lead with the servo pointing towards the left and the lead pointing forwards, and obviously there's our scratches. I'm going to rock this slowly and hook it on our modified Z-bend. Now let's go ahead and do a test fit here. The goal is going to be to have your finger down through this bottom hole, pressing down in, and we're going to move this servo until this is nice and neutral. Once again, we can go back to a trusty flat piece of foam board to find out where flat is. So keep this handy. Alright, let's go ahead and put a little bit of glue right here. Set it down in. We're going to pinch it with our finger. We're going to slide this until it's nice and neutral. And we're keeping the servo flat the whole entire time. Alright, so looks like right about there. Now I can't stress this enough. We don't want to move the servo. Give this a couple minutes to dry. You only need to hold it for about 30 seconds, but don't try any labor or any movements around this area for at least a minute. If this gets loose, you're going to lose the control authority on your airplane. Now that the elevator is done, we're going to do the exact same process on our rudder. We're going to slide our push rod with the Z-bend facing out, right on through. I'm going to grab this end here and let it rest on the outside of the fuselage. We'll grab our little control horn. Let's go ahead and face this so this bend is actually facing in like this. We're going to grab our control horn, pass it through, and then we're going to do a nice test fit. That looks good. Move that out of the way, we'll glue it down. This is the same process that we use on almost all of our swappables. Always listen to the instructions, but once you get really good at this, you'll be able to go through it very, very quickly. Of course, we're going to the other edge, just wiping off the excess. Alright, I'm going to hold this one down. It's under a little bit of pressure. We don't want it to be loose. Give it about 30-40 seconds. Now at this point we're going to do the same process as we did before, but I'm going to go back about 1/2 inch behind the front servo. First step like before, I'm going to bend it up straight towards us. Check for motion. That looks really good. The next step, we'll grab about 1 millimeter from the bend and we'll bend it away from us. So this one here, I'm going to cut a little bit shorter than the previous one, just because it's facing towards the wall. We're doing this to hopefully avoid a collision of the two wire ends. That looks good. So one different step here, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to turn it to a typical Z-bend. I'm going to rotate this very slowly 90 degrees. And if we need to sharpen up any bends, we can do so. Just like that. That there is your typical Z-bend. So like before, we're going to pass the servo right on through. Very careful with thin little servo arms. They're a little bit more fragile. This one's going to sit down slightly lower than the first servo. So once we're happy with the fit, we'll put some glue on. Drop this down into place. I'm going to concentrate on making sure this is both lower and the rudder centered up. Then we're going to hold it into place for a good minute. Now that our servos and our push rods and our control horns are in place for both the elevator and the rudder, we're going to go ahead and skin over it with this poster board here. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit of a pre-bend in the poster board just to make sure it's relaxed a little bit, so we don't have to fight it as much. The next thing I'm going to do is on this very back edge right here, I'm just going to knock off a little bit of the foam board and the foam. We'll knock off just a little bit of the paper and the foam board. That way when this sits down, it's glue into a surface. Once we have that, I'm going to put a drop of glue here on the other side and a little bit on the top here. I'm going to carefully center this up just like that. Let that dry thoroughly. Once the glue is thoroughly dried, now we can go ahead and handle this a little bit and start establishing the curve that we're going to need for our skin. Now you could take tape and tape this down, but one thing I'm going to go ahead and do is put a thin bead of glue on both the former and just the top lip of the fuselage. Make sure if you're going to do this though that you have either a scrap piece of foam or something nice and rigid like a steel ruler that you can then take this and then hold it down and get a decent amount of pressure on it. You don't want to push it so hard that it bends the foam, but you want to hold it nice and flat for a good finish. The poster board being under pressure, you're going to hold a little bit longer than normal. The nice thing is when you take the pressure off, you have a very nice clean edge. We're going to repeat the same process on the other side. Bead of glue on the former, thin bead of glue at the very top edge of the fuselage. Use a steel ruler to push it down and hold it. Steel rulers are really nice because they don't gouge and your razor won't ride up on them. I have a couple really good scars on my fingers by using a plastic ruler, and the razor blade bites into the plastic and then rides right up over my finger. Once we're happy with the fit, we can take a nice sharp razor blade, punch her just inside the foam, and then trim this back as far as we'd like. I actually use the razor blade in a sawing motion just to make it kind of wander and travel nice and clean. I'll put a little score here. Notice that when we put the glue, we didn't go all the way to the edge, we just went to the former. That'll pop off for us. Once the excess is off, I'm going to go ahead and go back and I'm going to trim this nice and flush. Alright, our next step is to put the wings on. Our next step is to join the wings to the fuselage. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to run this down and just put a little bit of a roll on the side of the wing that's passing through, just to give it a little bit of a easier pass. Once I do that, I'm going to line up the very bottom of the fuselage so as I push this wing down through, I can rock forward and it's not distorting the fuselage. This workbench will support the weight on it. With a rocking motion, I'm going to rock it through all the way until I get the center line into the center. Now before you glue it down, it's a very good idea. You can't check for perpendicular because the wing has a dihedral, but what you can do is slide straight down the center of it and make sure that the horizontal surfaces and the wing are equal on both sides. As long as you get the center of the wing and the center of the fuselage, it should be perpendicular, but that is one thing we can check for with our triangle. And that looks great. Once you're happy with it, a thin bead of glue on the bottom and the top of the wing is all you need. Now for this plane, I'm not going to even worry about putting any glue on the top portion of the wing. If it hits hard enough, this will give it a little bit of give. Also looks really nice that way. Now is the time to cut out our ailerons. We're going to go ahead and do this one at a time. This portion here is only a score cut as well as this hinge line, but I want to cut all the way through now that the wing has passed through the fuselage. So once I do that, now crack open my aileron very, very gently. If you have to go back with a knife and kind of rescore, that's fine too. I'm going to fold this all the way over 180 degrees. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut a bevel. Just as we did before, you can see I'm starting about 2 inches from the fuselage. I can always go back the other way and finish that cut. Now I'm going to use a little bit of a saw motion here and take my time since I can't get it any other way than perpendicular. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce this with a little bit of glue now. We're going to go ahead and let that dry, and we're going to repeat the process on the other side. So at this point we're going to install our servos into our fuselage. We're going to go ahead and snake the lead so it goes up towards the firewall, making sure that the servo arm is facing up. Now with a little rocking motion, this will slide right in for you. Once you're happy with the fit, we can rock it out just a little bit. Put 2 little drops of glue down, and then press it in. Repeat the exact same process on the other side. Alright, our next step is to snake our push rod wire through the servo arm and bend it back. Also, let's go ahead and press in and test fit our servo arm. Now, before we do this, we don't want to glue down the control horn just yet. We're going to use that for final adjustment. But what we do want to do is make this match up back where it originally was, and with the tip of our thumb, mark it. Now we're going to grab it, run the pliers right up to the tip of our thumb, we'll bend it in, and just like our modified Z-bend, grab it just inside that edge, and we're going to bend it up towards us. Just like that. Alright, we don't need all that excess wire, so let's go ahead and cut it off now. About 4 millimeters, or 1/4 of an inch. I don't know metric very well. Let's slide this on. Once again, you can use linkage stoppers if you want. It just adds weight and a little bit of complication for a model this size. Now the reason I said that we don't want to bend it and glue it in just yet. Now we can install this, but we can recenter our servos. We can make sure this is exactly spot on. A millimeter having to slide the push or control horn back and forth is not going to destroy anything as far as your throws go. If it's really bad, go back and rebend your push rod. So on this, this can only handle 1 cell of operation. If you plug a 2 cell or anything higher than a 1 cell in, or a NiCad 5V, it's going to blow it. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my little red wire in the second wire. That's going to give me exactly 1 cell of this 2 cell battery. And that way, I can make sure it's centered. This is our little servo tester that comes in the store. I just flipped it to center mode, and that's spot on. So we can carefully remove this, put a little bit of glue down, and we'll glue it in place. I always keep my servo center nice and close in case I bump something at the last minute. I can plug it in and make sure it's true. That looks great. Now we're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. So our servos are all in and installed. Our next step is to put our attention towards the landing gear. Now if you have a place where there's tall grass, you don't even need to do this step. You can skip this step, simply put a piece of packing tape on the bottom of this, and that way it protects the bottom and you can belly land it. And it's easy to launch with holding on the side. If you have concrete or someplace that you can land to take off with, then you definitely want a landing gear. Now this rod here is way longer than what we need, but we're going to go ahead and start from the center and work our way out. That's going to give us the most likelihood of having a nice symmetrical landing gear. This is 15.5 inches, or looks like just almost 40 centimeters. I'm going to split the difference right down the middle. In this case, it's going to be 7 3/4 inches, or about 20 centimeters. Okay, grabbing it in the middle, we're going to bend an acute angle, a little bit over 90 degrees. Now generally I have barbecue skewers and rubber bands holding this down. In this case we really don't want to do that because the plane is so small. To have all the rubber bands and confusion down there, it just won't look good. So we're actually going to install this permanently. If you're uncomfortable about doing it permanently, you can do the rubber band trick. You're just going to need to get some rubber bands. Okay, we're going to take this roughly about 2 inches, and I'm going to open this up until the 2-inch mark goes right about to the edge. Just like that. Once we're happy with that, I'm going to double check where my 2-inch mark is. I'm going to bend this straight down. I'm going to go ahead and go on the other side, measure 2 inches, bend straight down. Okay, so right now that looks funny. We don't want this. We want this to span open here. So we're going to go ahead and start opening this up. And this is where I'm going to go over. I'll just move this to the side. You can even use the grid on this to make sure everything's true. I'm going to start opening this up and try to make it so both edges lay nice and flat. And you can see I'm spreading this out. If your landing gear is too narrow, it's not going to perform good at all. And this is going to have a very squatty, short little landing gear. Nice thing about these old racers, the wheels are very, very close to the wing. It looks really cool. Alright, so just to give you a point of reference here, we got about an 8-inch span across this whole length, and you can see it's laying nice and flat and it's symmetrical. So if we look at inch 3 mark and 5 mark, they line up exactly with where we want. If you have grid boards, they're really, really helpful to keeping everything true and straight. Now, we're going to go about 2 inches. And this is where our wheel axles are going to be. 2 inches on the other side, and bend it. Now you can see that's a little bit of an angle on this side. A little bit more. That's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to lay this on the front, and you can see as far as angles go, I have this swept forward. In other words, this is not 90 degrees. This is swept forward from the landing gear. This is how a lot of them were back in the day, so they wouldn't tip over easy with those heavy motors. That's what we want. You guys can bend the landing gear however you want. It's all a matter of how it looks to you, but also if it handles poorly, consider how your wheels are pointed, whether they're pointing forward, backward, and toed in or toed out. The wider you can make it, the more stable it'll be on the ground. Alright, we don't need all this wire, and you have a couple different choices of wheels that you could do. You could buy one of our sets of wheels. We have 2 different sizes. I didn't include foam wheels on this here, on this little guy, because frankly people are telling me that they really don't like the foam wheels on a lot of the models. We're going to stop including them unless they are built like the Bushwhacker where they last. These guys are very cheap and a lot easier to get. I'm sorry, these guys are very cheap and are going to last a lot longer. Now because I'm going to be taking off some shortcut grass, I'm going to put this on. If you want to go with something very small, you can order these as well. We have a lot of different sizes here. Alright, so we don't need a lot of length here. Let's go ahead, cut it about a centimeter or 1/4 of an inch past the wire, or past the wheel. Got a mark there, slide it off. Good wire. Alright, same distance on the other side. Cool. Now before we put these wheels on, let's go ahead and test fit it onto the plane. Now normally, like I said, we rubber band this around, but this is such a small airplane, I want this just to be really secure and be permanent. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this, I'm going to press this down and make an indent on the foam. Now with our razor blade, we only want to cut through the first layer of foam. That backing layer on the other side, we want to keep intact. So I'm going to go ahead and follow this, but I'm only going to go through the first layer of foam. It's almost like we're cutting a little pie wedge out. Cut right through the edge there. All right, I'm going to take this little piece of scrap wire here, I'm going to drag it on through just to make sure that it's seated down nice. Alright, let's go ahead and test fit it. I'm supporting the weight, I'm not pushing against the whole airframe and damaging the top of my fuselage. I'm going to take a little barbecue skewer here and finish the job. There we are. Alright, if we're happy with that fit, we're going to go ahead and put a bead of glue, and then we're going to take a scrap piece of foam and then pack it down in. Before we glue it in, let's go ahead and just sit it on the mains and make sure we're happy with the way everything looks. It's a lot easier to take it off and adjust it. Looks good. I'm going to take the edge of my glue, I'm going to put it right over top of the landing gear. I'm going to squeeze a nice bead, making sure I'm pushing up against that landing gear. Press that in, let it dry. Now the landing gear is dried, let's go ahead and press on these wheels here. I'm going to make it so the little spokes kind of swirl forward. I'll just make a little hot glue wheel stop here. I'm actually just pushing the nose of the hot glue down right over it, making a little ball of glue right on the end. There we go. Give it a twirl. That'll keep it from binding. And repeat the same process on the other side. So now is the time that we're going to build our power pod. Our power pod is very simple. That's why we kept it in this build. But you're going to notice here that it's not a perfect rectangle. It actually tapers towards the back end of the pod. You have a flat edge here, and then you have a curved edge here. Where the top of the A is pointing to is going to be the very front of our power pod. Now, we're going to remove some foam. It's going to be in this cavity here and this cavity here. And also make sure you have the firewall from your kit. Now for the A-fold, we're going to focus most of our glue on the side cheeks. And then before, when we actually bend the side cheeks up, this time we're going to see the side cheeks down. We're going to fold the bottom plate up to 90 degrees. Take a little scrap piece of foam and smear off the excess glue. Repeat the exact same process on the other side. The reason why this has a bevel on the very top here is so we can get the proper down thrust. Now this is still compatible with other swappables, but other swappables where it has neutral thrust or a pod that's square, just make sure you align the original pod appropriately. Most of these swappables require down into the right. So you can see now we're going to have down thrust and we're going to have right thrust. You can see it sits in a slight angle. Our next step, with the little notch on the top facing towards the upper right, if you're facing the pod towards you, we're going to glue this firewall in. Let's make sure we put a good amount of glue that overcomes that undercut from the laser. You want to squeeze out just a little bit. Now this will also fly off of the 1806 A-Pack. We're going to be using our new F-Pack, which is the 2204. It's the same as our quad motors for our racers. It's a very powerful, wonderful little motor. You can fly this on both a 2 or 3 cell depending on the experience you want, but the nice thing is you can go all the way up to a 4 cell and really have some crazy speed out of these little planes. Just smearing off that extra glue. Alright, you don't want to glue your motor in quite yet. If you do so, the firewall is going to rip right off. We want to reinforce it with some packing tape or some Scotch tape. Just like wrapping a gift, we're going to start in the middle. I'm going to favor the excess tape towards the bottom of the foam board. Pull it nice and tight. And then wrap on both sides. Now just go ahead and just cut the bevels here and here. We'll go ahead and do one side first, then the other, then the final one. Now this is really, really important. The back of the motors have a little tiny shaft that pops out. If you don't cut this open, it's going to cause your motor to cog because startup torque on electric motors is not very strong at all. So let's go ahead and cut that out now. And while we're at it, just go ahead and make a couple of puncture holes for where the screws are going to pass through. We're only going to use 2 screws. We're not going to use those little tiny ones. This is 16mm spacing. Let's go ahead and cut off the rest of our tape here. Actually, you know what we could probably do? Just do that. Okay. Now in our electronics kit, we have a whole bunch of different screws for the motor mounts. We're going to want to pick the absolute shortest ones we have. If you use the longer ones, there's a chance it could go into the windings. Those are for thicker firewalls. It even includes a little tiny Allen wrench in the motor kit, which works fantastic. It's a very good quality Allen wrench. Let's go ahead and start these screws. All I'm doing is I'm just pushing against the hole. It's going to be a little bit of a tight thread at first, and then it'll thread right on through for you. I'm only going to take this maybe a 1/2 millimeter sticking out, just enough so you can see the very first thread. Our next step is to take the 16-hole spacing, and we're going to line this up, and we're just going to wiggle it back and forth, and you're going to feel it line up with our screws. Once we have that, we'll go ahead and carefully tighten each screw, and we should feel it engage the motor. You notice it because it'll wiggle less. Now don't tighten one all the way. Once you get one threaded, go to the second one. Once you feel both of them, then you can tighten them both equally. There we are. Now I've already made sure the motor is spinning in the right direction. If you guys aren't familiar with these electric motors and you have any questions, we have a link down below. But long story short, if it's spinning backwards, all you need to do is replace 2 of the leads and it'll spin the opposite direction. Make sure also that none of the copper can touch each other. If you have exposed copper, seal it off with a piece of tape or some insulation. So the final step with the power pod is that we installed some Velcro here. Now I go fuzzy on the fuselage. It's whatever you pick, just make sure you stay consistent. And we're going to go ahead and pass our power pod right into the fuselage. So it should be a nice snug fit, just like that. There we go. I'm going to press it up against the top of it. You're going to see here, if we went all the way back to where it is, this would be too far in. So now we're going to carefully take this out just so the edge of the motor is peeking over. If you need to dry fit your propeller, this would be a good time to do so. Just make sure you take it off afterwards. In this case, eyeballing it, it's right about there. We're going to put our focus on this portion here. So where the prop is actually turned to the side, we want to make sure that this side clears. Press that all the way up against the top. Then we're going to take our barbecue skewer. We're going to pretend it's a drill bit. We're going to just slightly turn and poke until we pop through the one side. Now we're not going to try to go all the way through because we're most likely not going to hit this hole on this side. We're going to go to this side, do the same process. Once we have that, we're going to go to the back. And this one we can see a lot easier. Little twist and a little poke. Same on the next side. Little twist, little poke. Once we're happy with that, we can pass the skewer all the way through. Now I'm going to cut this just a little bit longer than I need to, and you'll see why shortly. Same process on the back side. Giving it about a 1/2 inch on both sides. Alright, now we have all the leads for all of our controls. We have our throttle, elevator, rudder, and our 2 ailerons. For the 2 ailerons, we're going to snake them up, and we're going to use the supplied Y harness in our kit to join both of them together. If you don't want to use a Y harness and add more weight and you have 2 separate leads and you have a programmable radio, you can also wire them into 2 separate channels and then bind the channels together. That's what I'm going to do here. Alright, so aileron goes ground up into channel 2, And I'm going to go ahead and plug in this other channel into channel 5. I'm going to take my elevator channel. On the Grapner, it's going to go to channel 3. Pass this under here. And rudder is going to go to channel 4. Now, depending on what model transmitter you have, the channel assignments may be different, so don't take my word on it. Futaba is a little bit different than Spectrum and Grapner, so just keep that in mind. Now I can go ahead and fold this down. I already have this pre-bound to my MZ24, so I don't need to go ahead and bind it for it. If you guys are curious about binding, we have lots of different videos in our beginner series, and also if Spectrum is your flavor, we have a video link on showing how to bind Spectrum. Also look for some informative videos on the MZ24 and the other models. Alright, I'm going to pass this down through. Just for right now, I'm going to let that live right there. Whoop, almost forgot the throttle. So just to dress this up here, I'm going to go ahead and put a very, very small little dot of hot glue right on the back here. That way if I have to make any changes, I just have to rock it loose. I'm going to sit this down in here like so. Now if you have nose weight issues or tail weight issues, you can break that loose and bring this up more forward. You want to make sure this balance is in the right spot, and it looks like it's going to be just fine. Alright, I'm going to let my ESC stay loose, and that way we can move this to the side to get our battery in. Speaking of batteries, let's go ahead and put it in, get our control centered up. So with our prop still off, we're going to go ahead and turn this on, and we're going to go ahead and make sure our channels all have the right control throws and the right direction. Okay. Of course my other aileron doesn't work because I got to program it. Okay, so I have no control on my right aileron because it's two separate channels. I'm going to go ahead, and you can actually dial this as dual aileron control, or I can simply go in here to aux 1. Go here, and it'll say select. And I can program it. Now all I need to do is reverse one of them, which will be my right one. So I'm going to go ahead into reversing. I'm going to go ahead and check channel 2. And we're all done. Like these touch screens on these Grapners. So our ailerons are going the right direction. In other words, when I move the aileron stick to the right aileron raises. Now the elevator, when I pull the stick back, should go up. It's going down. So I'm going to go ahead and touch channel 3. That's going to reverse my elevator. So now when I pull back, the elevator raises. My rudder is currently backwards. When I push the elevator stick to the right, the rudder's moving to the left. So I'm going to go ahead and change channel 4. There we are. If you need to do any servo centering, now would be the time to do that. You can go into servo subtrim. And as you can see, my elevator is just a little bit pitched down. I can go ahead and change that. There we are, nice and flat. Same situation with my rudder here. Let's go ahead and fix that. There we are. Wonderful. Now in your kit you have a throw gauge. The throw gauge looks like an awkward looking rectangle with 2 bevels on it. So these throw gauges are just suggestive. If you're an advanced pilot and you want to really go crazy, I'd strongly recommend you dial in a lot of expo because this has a lot of control authority. But to do the throw gauges, we're going to go ahead and line this up on the very back of the rudder, and then we're going to deflect it, and we're going to adjust our travel so it just meets that. Now the higher pitch one is for high rates and the lower pitch one is for the low rates. We're going to go around to all our control surfaces and dial these in. Also, if you have dual rate and expo, dial in 30% expo all around the whole entire airplane, ailerons, rudder, and elevator. Now our control throws are done, we can go ahead and put our prop on because the next time we power this up, we're going to be flying it outside. Okay, with all of our electronics in place now, we can go ahead and put our attention towards the hatch here. Now this hatch here is going to go ahead and press down in, and the paper is just going to cup on the outer sides here. We're going to go ahead and size this paper just enough so it just cups and covers right here. Like so. So I'm going to go ahead and push a little tiny indent down, and then we'll cut that flush. This is going to be our hinge. This is what's going to be holding the front of our plane on. Matter of fact, I'll probably just go ahead and make this adjustment on the kit, so there's a good possibility you guys won't even need to worry about that. There we are. The final stage is we're going to go back with red paint and we're going to finish off a lot of these details. But we don't need to worry about that right now. Alright, everything fits good. We're happy with that. I'm going to put a little thin bead of glue right at the very edge here. I can press this down all the way. Press this against here. It's not going to keep your power pod from coming out. Just a nice friction fit. Now that's the front end. We need to worry about the back end. And if you want to get fancy in your kit, you're going to get a little tiny circle of foam cut out with a little hole in it. We're going to go ahead and pass this through here. I'm going to take this in just far enough. I'm going to smear a little bit of glue over top of that. I'm also going to go ahead and make this kind of rubbery. I'm just going to smear a little bit of glue all the way around just to make this a little bit more durable. And follow up a piece of foam. I can always go back with a Sharpie afterwards and fix it up. We're basically making a glorified thumbtack. Okay. Now with the pointy end still on, let's go ahead and with the twirling motion, make our hole. Just like that. Now that we have that, we can cut this shorter. So now you can take this just like a push pin, stick this in, but when you want to remove it, you simply slide the headrest out. So for decorative reasons, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the engine nacelles. That's why we kept these guys longer. In your kit and also on the plans, you can hand cut these, are 4 pieces. Back in the golden era of Flite, airplanes had big engines. So we're going to go ahead and make a dummy engine. Now, you can paint these black, draw silver on them, make them silver stacks, but these are going to go ahead and press fit right over these existing holes and work as stoppers. Where the booms stick out, you can paint those silver and make them look like little tiny spark plugs. Once you have your little dummy engines built, you can slide them right over the heads, and they act great as little barbecue stops, and they add a lot of looks to the airframe. Our next step is to establish balance, and that's going to be done by where we place the battery. Now, if you have a very heavy battery, it's going to go further back into the airframe. If it's a very light battery, like a 2-cell, it'll probably be all the way at the nose. Needless to say, let's go ahead and stick it on the Velcro and find out where it needs to go. Our balance point is going to be right at the center crease line of the wing, right here. You can then adjust a little bit forward and backwards depending on how maneuverable or how smooth you want it to fly. Once we put that in there, we're going to want it to go just a touch nose down. So in this case, we're going to slide it back just a little bit more. I always like my planes to tip to just a touch nose down because you know it's definitely favoring on the nose heavy side. You can always move it back later. Well friends, the FT Mini Sportster is all complete. The only thing left to do now is go fly it. Now if you've never flown a built plane before, this is your first Maiden, I strongly recommend you check out the video 6 quick tips for a successful first flight. That'll give you all the tips you need to have a great first flight. A lot of them we've already covered in this, but it never hurts to go over it again. Alright, let's go out and put it through the air. Well friends, we are ready, and just as all Maidens, it seems like it's dark now. We're going to put this up in the air, but it's almost too dark to fly, so Peter's going to help us out. You have a fascination with lights, don't you?
Yep, I'm actually going to probably start a flashlight review channel, so I'm starting to buy some really expensive lights. This is a Phoenix PD35, which is a really bright flashlight. So I'm going to spotlight you. You're
going to spotlight me. All right, cool. Do you think we should take it off or?
It's up to you.
No, we'll take it off. What's the worst that can happen? Here, I'll put it right here.
Okay.
Right, left, right, up, down. Dude, that light's amazing. Flies great. Can you see it okay, Dave? Mm-hmm. Alright, unfortunately I can't do anything too crazy because it's not the brightest out.
Yeah, I should go buy a more expensive light now. This is supposed to be like 1,000 lumens.
Really?
Yeah. But it's not pitch black, so I won't totally judge it yet.
Vertical. Woo! All right.
Looks like flies great.
Yeah, flies good. All right. Oh, just in case. I know some people are like, oh, you only go one direction. There's a turn the other way. All right, let's put it for a crash landing here.
All right, sounds good. Are you gonna try to make the runway? Watch out, center block. Oh!
There it is.
There it is.
Boom! I didn't see the center block.
You almost piled it.
All right, friends. Want to thank you for watching. If you're watching this right now, the free plans, obviously this video are up, and also the speedboat kit's on the store, so check it out. Thanks for watching.